know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
For those watching on video today, is Suit Day CJ. That's a new name I'm trying to workshop for you on days when I know you have to go to the rink after we record and you're wearing a suit. So I'm trying to workshop something.
It's funny. I was going to say there's not much mystery. It's usually if there's a game day, it's a suit day because we record first thing in the morning and I got to run on to the next jobs after this one.
Okay. This is my opportunity to ask because tomorrow I will be on a plane to Florida for the Flames-Panthers game. I would love to know suggestions from yourself on how I should dress at FLA Live Arena.
Oh, man, I'm the wrong guy. I would be wearing a suit. Like all the times I've covered a game down there in Florida, that's been what I've had to wear. Usually I've been doing that with TV duties. So, you know, you got way more style than I do. I don't think you need any advice from me.
Oh, I mean, less about like, okay, like stylistically how I should dress. I mean, more like how cold is the arena? Like Daniel Nugent-Bowman, who covers the Oilers for The Athletic, was saying it's cold. But I also want to know, I want to get a second source on this. Like, should I bother wearing the suit or should I wear like, could I get away with wearing a sweater or could I get away with just wearing like a short sleeve dress shirt and like jeans or something?
Oh, I don't think you could get away with short sleeves, but I don't remember that rink being particularly cold either. Not to challenge DMB, but that doesn't plant in my memory as one of the, like Buffalo is a really cold rink and there's like wind tunnels blowing through it. So it feels even colder, for example, but I don't think of the rink in Florida that way. They used to have some pretty greasy snacks in the press box. I don't know if that's still the case, but they at one point in time would like bring out chicken wings and stuff like that, which frankly, I'm not saying there should be in any press box, but you usually don't get that in press boxes. But you know, let's face it. One of the highlights of covering a game down there is hopefully staying somewhere near Fort Lauderdale and maybe walking the beach in the afternoon or going for lunch on a patio or something like that.
Okay. I'm going to try to do that in between my time in Florida. Anyway, hockey talk is what people came here for. And what
Stay
I
out of the
wanted
elbow room. Stay out of the elbow room.
The elbow room.
Oh, I've seen many an NHL related person, not just journalists, have a wayward night at the elbow room.
Okay. All right. Warning heeded.
Famous bar on the Fort Lauderdale beach stretch.
Stay out of the elbow room. I feel like you I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to, but I feel like you have a story there.
No, I don't have one story. I've got about 32 stories. I mean, I would say it's the main haunt on the circuit for, like, I've seen player agents in there. I've drank with GMs in there. I'm sure officials go there. I can't recall seeing one. And then of course, all of our media colleagues tend to go there. So it's just one of those places, you know, there's no one specific story. I'm not trying to like allude to anything here. It's one of those kind of fun bars that somehow all NHL people end up in. And, you know, my experience when you travel with like cover one team all the time, usually those games when you're in Florida is when it's more relaxed, you know, even around the team, even like the coach and GM. Like if I think of the places where I've had a beverage with someone immediately with the team, like it's usually somewhere like Florida or sometimes California. For whatever reason, I think just the vibes get a little loosened there. And so anyway, just giving you advice. I mean, on one hand, I want to tell you to go to the elbow room, but be prepared for a tough morning if you do.
Now this makes me want to go to the elbow room. I don't know. This now I feel like, you know, if after the game, because I think the Panthers Flames game is in the afternoon on Saturday. So if we get to writing, I'll probably get to the elbow room at a decent hour, which probably means I don't have to be there at like 3 a.m. getting myself in trouble. That's not so bad.
Right. Well, we'll take this conversation offline, but our loyal listeners should know that there are a few places around the league that like it'll be fun. This year's All-Star weekend is in Fort Lauderdale /Sunrise. So it'll be hard to get into the elbow room, I would predict, on All-Star weekend, because there'll be so many NHL types trying to do so. And it was very much like that. The draft was there in 2015. It was like that. So anyway, I digress.
Okay, last thing, and then I promise I will get on an NHL topic before we get to sports interaction. Ziggy's or the elbow room?
Oh, don't. I
just want to know. I love
all of my children equally, Julian.
Oh my.
I can love a bar in each city and not have to pick one or the other.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to know if there was a clear winner between the two.
I mean,
because now I have to go to the elbow room if you can't pick.
Well, it's just the elbow room is literally on Fort Lauderdale Beach. And, you know, because we cover a sport played in winter, so often you get on a road trip there in like December or even November, and you get out of the snow and you can put on some shorts, and it's just a really relaxed vibe. It's nothing crazy. It's just, it's a fun bar that's right on the beach. And so that it's hard to say I would take that over a slightly dingy basement bar in Montreal. It's hard not to say I would take that, but I love Ziggy's too. So why you have me out here saying anything bad about Ziggy's?
I'm not asking you to say nothing bad about Ziggy's. I'm just asking just a preference. You don't have to shit on Ziggy's. You could just be like, you know what? Like
both bars bring something in common. They like never tell you to go home. They just never close, it feels like. So anyway.
Chris Johnston. Here's the thing, man. You're laughing and be like, oh, we got to take this offline. This is the content people love on this show, man. Like,
really, I feel like a lot of people are clicking ahead right now. They're like, come on, it's the hockey. What are you guys talking about?
That's fair. They would like to know about some of the NHL gossip that I know, at least before we were recording yesterday, you were teasing about for us to get to on today's show. I did want to get to a column that my colleague at The Athletic, Murat Atesh, wrote earlier this week called "The Winnipeg Jets Deserve More Respect Than They're Getting So Far." What a turn. We go from Florida to Winnipeg. You go from heat to cold. But yeah, like the Jets are near the top. Some
good bars in Winnipeg too. Don't worry about that.
Oh, okay. When it comes time for me to go to Winnipeg. Thank you. When it comes time for that, please, yes. They're near the top of the Central Division, 9-4-1 record. I'd love to know your thoughts on the Winnipeg Jets, and if it's time for us as national media, regional, national, whatever, to respect the Winnipeg Jets more.
Well, I don't disrespect them. So, I mean, we can't start from a place, like we should not start this conversation from a place where I think they're a bad team like that. I mean, I think we've been pretty consistent the times we've touched on them during season 2 of our pod here, that they're a team that's intrigued me with the coaching change they made, because they have skilled players, because they had an obvious flaw, which was their defensive play as a team in recent seasons. It was one thing that held them back, and they bring in a coach in Rick Bowness who's known for fixing those types of things. I mean, I was intrigued by the Jets. I would say that I still need to see more. Before I mean, this is why we haven't done, tell Murat, we haven't done the contenders pretenders yet. We need a little bit more sample size, I think, before I'm making any big pronouncements. I'm not putting the J word on anybody or anything like this. I mean, let's face it, if we're putting the J word on anyone, it's probably the New Jersey Devils at this point in time, but I'm not even saddling them with that.
Ooh, I don't know.
So what I will say though is, like, clearly good start to the year. They've got a pretty deep forward lineup. Connor Hellebuyck's played well. So, I mean, I think you're seeing some improvement, but I need to see more. I respect Murat's opinion, but so many times, 15 games into a season, you make a big pronouncement and all the air comes out. There's still a lot of runway left here for all teams. And that's why I think we should withhold our judgment to some degree on most teams. I mean, we were kicking St. Louis pretty hard, and now all of a sudden the Blues have put 4 straight wins back together, and they don't look, quite so bad. So let's let the water find its level still.
I actually like that. Let's let water find its level still. Where do you come up with all of these sayings, Siege?
I don't know. I heard a few. There's this old guy at the elbow room once, and he was just whispering all these things into my ear, and they've stuck.
What the hell? What random guy at the elbow room was whispering things into your ear?
This sage reporter. No, I'm just kidding. But I don't know. I don't know where that all comes from. It's not planned. I'll tell you that much.
You could have easily like fooled everyone and been like this wise sage old man who covered the Panthers for 20 years, just sits at the elbow room and just whispers sweet, maybe not sweet nothings, but just great things into your ear. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of philosophical lessons to be learned there.
Oh, man. All right. So we're definitely taking that part of our conversation offline. But in the meantime, it's time to bring on David Bastel from Sports Interaction. As always, it's for those 19 and over. And we ask that you please play responsibly. And there will be a link to responsible gaming strategies in the description of this show. This is called You Can Bet That. Play the intro.
Sports Interaction, Canada's Sportsbook, presents You Can Bet That with David Bastel. Must be 19 plus. Please play responsibly. Ontario only.
Welcome to You Can Bet That with David Bastel. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here, guys.
Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. Today is a Canada soccer centric You Can Bet That. I love it. The World Cup.
Change it up a little bit, eh? Yeah.
I like it. I'm not used to the World Cup starting at this point in the year, so don't mind me as I'm still very like, oh, what's going on? But you have us on lock with some great prop bets up on the Sports Interaction website.
Yeah, it's all about Canada, guys. Of course, this doesn't happen too often. Hopefully, this is the beginning of a trend that happens every single 4 years for the nation. But Sports Interaction right now has about 50 different unique Canada-only props. I wanted to dig into a couple of them with you right now. The first one I wanted to talk about, and this has been one of our hot ones because it's like, really, there's a prop on that? Will any Canadian player cry during the national anthem? It's only for the first game. Oh, my God. I know. It's only for the first game. The heavy favorite says no. And I thought, yeah, well, you're concentrating your focus, CJ. You're not crying. I talked to Craig Forrest the other day, who's doing some great work with us. And he says, you bet somebody's going to cry. I'm betting yes. And I'm like, wow, you're literally, and it's Craig Forrest. So you really have to take this opinion as the highest standard. And I'm like, oh yeah, I am shocked by it. What about you guys? Any tears during the national anthem? It's any player on the Canadian team that tears up during the anthem. So there's 25 to choose from, CJ.
Let's remember the context here. None of us saw this happening. I mean, obviously we've seen it happening for the last year because Canada had such a great run through the qualifying. But, 7 years ago, if we had this conversation, I would not have guessed Canada would be at the World Cup in the year 2022. So some of these players have been at this for a long time. And they've been trying to sort of dream this dream. You can't dream if you're a Canadian soccer player internationally. So I think someone might be emotional. I can't tell you who, but I'm not afraid to say I'm a crier myself. So yeah. I would not be surprised.
I'm on your team.
if someone shed a tear or two after everything, reflecting on the journey to get there when they heard that anthem.
Yeah,
I'm not above crying, but like first game, you're doing everything you can to get focused. Like these guys are professionals. Here's another thing.
I hope the Belgians are crying after the game.
There you go.
I mean, look, I hope every team in that group cries after they play Team Canada. But I don't know. I as much as I would want to say yes for this, I don't know. I feel like because of the quality of players on that Canada roster, I mean, they're going to try their absolute best to. They'll recognize the magnitude of the stage, but I think because of the quality of some of those players, maybe they don't necessarily need to cry before that first game. But not above them crying.
And you know what? Honestly, this is really the debate because these are the conversations I'm having with different groups of friends. And here we are talking about the same thing. It's kind of like you see both sides. But okay, I got one more before I go. All right. Canada conceded 5 goals back in the Mexico 1986 World Cup. Sorry. How many? I know exactly. My mind's everywhere. How many will they concede during this World Cup? So you got less than 5, more than 5, or exactly 5. The favorite right now is more than 5 goals. I'm not buying it. I know Belgium's a really good team. I don't know if Morocco scores on this team, which would be great. So where are the 5 goals going to come from? I'm taking the under.
Well, they might let in 5 if they go all the way to the final.
Yeah, it's only group stage. Only group stage.
Oh,
yeah.
Only group stage. Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm going on
3 games. So 3 games.
I'm all in on this team. Like I think they're going to be good. I'm going under.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a hard time thinking that they're going to allow 5 goals through 3 games, but I'm more intrigued about how many they're actually going to score because DB, I don't think Team Canada has ever scored in the at their time at the World Cup at all. The bar is so low for them. If they get 1 goal, that's already better than what they did in 1986. So if they allow goals, they allow goals. But if they score, that's going to be the big thing for me.
And that right there, my friend, is also a massive prop. We have a list of the Canadian roster and who will score the first Canadian goal. I'll let you guys think about that another time. Maybe we'll talk about it next week or something. But that right now, I call that the postage stamp goal, because you know that whoever scores that first ever Canadian goal at the World Cup, one day our kids are going to be buying, well, if they even exist anymore, postage stamps with that guy's face on it, because it's going to be like a heritage moment. I'm getting chills thinking about it. I can't wait. So.
I love this. I love this. This is really fun. DB, thank you so much for this soccer centric. You
back to hockey next week. Okay. Back to.
Oh man. Don't forget to check out sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. Again, sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. DB, we'll talk to you next week.
You guys are the best. Take care.
You're the best. Let's talk about Hockey Canada. This week, another set of parliamentary hearings going down. Bob Nicholson, once upon a time the CEO and president of Hockey Canada, now working with the Edmonton Oilers, called to speak in front of the Canadian government. Also, Pat McLaughlin, the senior vice president of strategy, also called to speak this week. The big headline out of that is that Hockey Canada paid about $1.6 million to a crisis management firm named Navigator, and they've done so since July. But they stress that they have not used public funds for that $1.6 million. There are a few other things, but we can get into that. Siege, I would love to know your thoughts and whatever insight you have on what transpired this week with Hockey Canada.
Well, that's not just a crisis management firm, Navigator. That's the crisis management firm if you are up to your neck in a situation. So, I'm not surprised. I'm not even saying they shouldn't be hiring these types of firms. I know how it looks, but, obviously that organization was facing a pretty big set of challenges. I don't know what advice was given, what was taken. It's hard. We can't really parse that down, but I would say that's probably standard industry practice when you find yourself in a crisis. But let's face it, Hockey Canada didn't end up managing that crisis too well. They've completely basically disbanded their leadership group and team and rebuilding that. There's a board meeting coming up in December the 17th. I have in my mind, but in or around December 17th, where they're going to reconstitute the board, eventually hire a new CEO, and hopefully put a lot of this stuff in the past. The other thought I had on the parliamentary hearings this week, though, was you've had a much more contrite, honest seeming responses from Bob Nicholson than a lot of the previous ones. Of course, what the difference is here, Bob now works for the Edmonton Oilers and hasn't worked at Hockey Canada for years. I mean, Hockey Canada in a lot of ways, though, is his baby professionally. He turned that organization completely around from when he took it over to when he left, in a lot of ways. But obviously, as he acknowledged, there were some shortcomings that he had, and maybe not establishing the right culture or allowing some of these things to slip. But he was far more, in my opinion, open and honest when fielding questions. And we saw the previous couple rounds of these questions, and so. I guess it's probably easier to speak more freely when you're not trying to protect the job at this point in time. But, it was interesting. I missed it on the day, but I went back and listened to some of what they put together. And I thought he was pretty straightforward with all of his thoughts. Didn't feel like he was deflecting any questions or anything like that.
Two notable things from Bob at the hearing. He says he takes operational responsibility for at least 2 of the slush funds that were created. And he apologized for not having written guidelines in place on how Hockey Canada should handle sexual assault claims. To your point about how Bob has responded to all of this, I mean, still, he's going to come under scrutiny under criticism. We think of it's weird to say actors, but we think of the people involved with some of the lawsuits that have been brought about involving Hockey Canada, notably involving athletes who have turned to players, and people are wondering what should come to them if they're deemed guilty. Shouldn't some of that same pressure be applied to Bob Nicholson, who currently works in an NHL role?
Well, I suspect it is. I don't know how his boss feels. I mean, ultimately, he works for Daryl Cates, the owner of the Edmonton Oilers, and the difference between Hockey Canada, which is a nonprofit company that has a lot of jurisdictional requirements to report to governments and, a lot of these things, is it's a private company, the Oilers. So I don't know what his boss will do, but I suspect that there are some of those questions being asked. It's a complicated legacy. I think this highlights, though, in the world that as much as we all want to run to sort of, it's black and white, right and wrong, that there is some gray always, and things are complicated. And Hockey Canada under Bob's stewardship literally became a behemoth in terms of the money it generated, the success the teams had on both the World Junior level, the women's game and the men's game. And yet this culture also, when you pick up the rock and look under it, is left behind too. And so, that all goes on his record. And I think that's what he said himself. He mentioned, the times that he was personally involved with maybe meeting a victim or their family. And so often the discussions they had at the board level were in camera, it's called. So basically all of that was never documented in a formal way in their meeting notes. And so a lot of it kind of gets lost to history and our imagination, I suppose. And so, yeah, I think it's a hard record to judge fully. And I do think he's worthy of those questions being asked, and we'll see what his boss thinks, because that's ultimately what's going to happen. I mean, I guess public pressure could have some role in that outcome, but I don't really see it going down that way. It's different that he's now moved on to this job with the Oilers, and I think had he still been running the Hockey Canada itself.
That's close to what I think about it too. If he was still working with Hockey Canada, it would be a lot easier for people to say, hey, step down from this job or resign or what have you. The fact that he is no longer working in that role and he has since moved on to an NHL team, I wonder what that means. I think he should be under immense pressure and immense scrutiny. I don't know if it will translate into him losing his job with the Edmonton Oilers. I have questions about that, and I wonder about that. There's a lot to take in from that. But
there's scrutiny in the process, right? I mean, he had to
100%.
Like that. I'm sure he felt a lot of personal pressure. I haven't spoken to Bob since he did this, but he felt personal pressure and scrutiny in that parliamentary hearing. Look, it can't be comfortable. I mean, he should be proud of a lot of the things that happened at Hockey Canada, but he must feel shame in this way too. And I think
he should.
Exactly. But I saw contrition in him. Honestly, like I didn't see someone up there trying to protect his record. I saw someone taking responsibility and saying, and not, that's the other thing. He wasn't deflecting and saying, well, this person should have done it, or this person. He's like, I was at the top. I was responsible. This happened on my watch. This shouldn't have happened. We should have done, I think that there was definitely elements of contrition to what he was saying. And I didn't think he was evading questions or trying to blame someone else. I thought he took that pressure. And then now you just wonder, I don't know what happens next. I mean, we haven't seen a process like this, right? Is there going to be more parliamentary sessions? Is this, I don't really know what happens next when it comes to some of the former people involved. Just, obviously we're getting close to the point where Hockey Canada is actually going to hire a new board and eventually put a new leadership team in place and try to move forward.
And I wonder if this means, if with everything new going in, I know some people have wondered, oh, well, you have to swipe everything and make it clean with Hockey Canada, if that means you have to change the name or anything like that. I don't know if they would want to still carry on that legacy that they've unfortunately built for themselves.
Yeah. And I think that discussion has to happen with the new leadership though, right? It can't, in this interim period, I don't want to say there's no one running the organization. There are, obviously, you still have someone like Scott Salmon who runs the men's national teams. I'm sure he's up to his elbows with the World Juniors because we're not that far from World Junior Select. You know, like there are people doing the day-to-day operational tasks, but there's no one at the highest level making decisions for the future of the organization just yet. And that's what comes next once they get this board in place.
All right. We will leave it there when it comes to Hockey Canada. And of course, as we've tried to do throughout this entire process, we will continue to discuss it when other news arises. The annual general manager meetings for this week, which I'm not going to lie, I'm a bit confused because I thought we had GM meetings in March, but there's more off of this week. Am I wrong? Am I just not thinking straight for a Thursday morning? Tell me, CJ.
You're right. There's a calendar to this. And really, what the November GM meetings are about, this happens every year around Hall of Fame weekend, at least in a post-COVID or pre-COVID world, that was the plan. And the GMs get together. I think they take a look at early trends in the season. They talk about, they identify areas where they might be looking to make rule changes. And then ultimately that all gets passed to the longer GM meetings in March, which is a 3-day event after the trade deadline, you know, ostensibly a less pressure-filled time for general managers because there's nothing they can do. They're kind of locked in with their teams, and they spend 3 days where that's where you see changes happen to the rule book. And over the years, there's been some significant ones being down there. You know, the creation of Rule 48, which was at the time was a huge controversial rule, and the like. So that's what went on. But the other interesting part, of course, about November is we are getting to the point where GMs are getting a sense of their teams. And it just so happens we're all in the same room and maybe a chance to take some of their conversations offline and start to work on some trade chatter. And I think that, you know, we'll see some of that percolate out here in the next few weeks.
Seems like two GMs who come to mind when it comes to trade chatter, at least they're the more front-facing off of these meetings. Pierre Dorion with the Ottawa Senators and Mike Greer with the San Jose Sharks. Which one should we start with first? Are Pierre and the Sens and what they might be looking for, or are Mike Greer and San Jose with Erik Karlsson?
Well, let's jump in on Erik Karlsson. I mean, we're talking about, you know, it was actually a player that Mike Greer described to us reporters as one of the 3 best offensive defensemen in the league in his view. You know, obviously having a great year this season, which we've touched on a few times. Yeah, I think it's interesting that he acknowledged publicly that he would listen. I suppose if you're him, you might say, well, how is that news, guys? If you listen on everybody, right? I mean, you might get into some semantics there, but, you know, if there was ever to be a Karlsson trade, and that's still a big if, you know, because of the price tag attached to him, you know, he doesn't just have $11.5 million this year. It's for the next 4 years beyond this too, which, you know, is, I'm not going to say, I actually don't believe it's immovable because of how well he's played, but I think it's a very difficult contract to contemplate trading, but the sides are going to need each other, right? Erik Karlsson has a full no move clause. So he's going to have to work with San Jose if they do look to move him on places he's willing to play, what the right fit might be. And I think ultimately they're going to have to retain perhaps even a significant amount of salary to make that trade work, or at least take back players or something to have the books be balanced. But I certainly think it's possible. You know, we saw them work with Brent Burns and trading him to Carolina in the offseason. You know, what Mike Greer said that didn't get as much attention was, I'm going to have these conversations with all my veteran players. He said, you know, this is a former player that's jumped into this seat and clearly wants to, I don't know if it's a full rebuild or retool. You know, I actually don't know what Mike Greer's true vision is, but he definitely wants to trade some veterans. And I think he wants to do right by the players because he understands what it's like to be a player. So I think they're going to be a very interesting team leading up to March 3rd. And if Erik Karlsson keeps playing well, maybe we get a blockbuster. I mean, I won't rule that out. I know that I'm in the minority because someone out there is going to say there's no way you can trade him at 11 million. But what happens if they get that down to 7 million? Just to throw out a number, and you look at how well he's performing. I think that there are teams out there that can at least talk themselves into it, even though there's clearly risk because of Erik's age and you know, the injuries he's had. You know, you just don't know if the next 4 seasons, what they're going to look like for him.
That's very true. But hey, you know what? In the age of wanting to win now and getting yourself ready for the playoffs, maybe it is a worthwhile deal.
Wouldn't it be awesome if he could get traded back to Ottawa? I mean,
I thought about that.
I realize it's so unlikely, but you know, he married a woman from Ottawa. He spends a lot of his off-season time there. I know he split last summer between Sweden and Ottawa, but he's got deep ties to the city. He wrote actually a really nice piece with the help of the Players Tribune about his relationship with Daniel Alfredson. I mean, there would be a sort of storybook quality to seeing him back in a Senators sweater. I'm not sure it can work or will happen, but I mean, I try to look for places where it might make sense. Could he be a fit in Florida? They have some cap challenges, but there's maybe some ways to make that work. I mean, I'm trying to think of where he would want to go, where it lines up. There's only a handful of places is kind of the point. But the sentimentalist in me, we would love to see him back with the Senators at some point.
That would be cool. I wonder how involved they would be if they already deal with their hole on defense. We've been talking about the Senators being linked to a defenseman for months on end, it feels like.
Yeah, and they're still pursuing that. And, look, the Senators, it's not an easy trade for them to make. Right now they have Nikita Zaitsev, who they passed through waivers and has kind of been in limbo. They didn't send him to the American Hockey League, but he makes $4.5 million. And he's basically not playing when everyone's healthy, at least. The one thing Pierre Dorian I thought was interesting in chatting with him a bit is he's of the view that maybe the solution is internal, that, they're really leaning on Jake Sanderson and Jacob Bernard Docker. Some of these guys, that younger players, and playing them more minutes than they'd ever get to play. And he kind of mused like, you never know, you do that. And one of them really takes off and you find your solution that, you don't give up assets for. Of course, the name I think that's more fair to connect them to is Jakob Chychrun, who's also still very much on the market. He's about to make his return from off-season surgery. Play for the Coyotes. And this is a player that Senators have inquired on and had conversations on, but have balked at the price to this point. And so it's all starting to swirl if you see what's out there. And certainly Pierre Dorian didn't shy away from the fact that he's been very active in trying to make a move because they've had some injuries. And I think they don't have enough talent right now on the back end to get to where they want to go to. But, I think the Sens actually are a team that have probably their record is worse than the way they've played. And so, I think it's worth them pursuing this because I still think they could salvage something this season. I don't think they've dug too deep of a hole. And I actually think that the results suggest that they should be in for some more wins here coming up.
Are there any other teams circling in on Jakob Chychrun?
Not right now. I think what a lot of teams want to do is see him play, right? He's played about 6 minutes of ice time in 8 months or something. And so it's hard to, Arizona wants 2 first-round picks for Jakob Chychrun. I'm not saying they'll get that, but the point is this is a young cross-controlled defenseman on a pretty good contract. And isn't that far removed from a big season. And so I think any team that wants to look at him wants to see him play and see what he looks like after these surgeries he's had. He's had a couple knee surgeries. I think he had a shoulder issue. He's had a wrist issue. So, he's dealt with a lot, even though he's a pretty young guy. But, I wonder about teams like Edmonton or Toronto, if he becomes an option for them when he gets back. But I think they've got to see him play. Like that's not reporting that they're banging down the door at this point, because I think everyone needs to know what version of him exists after, this long layoff and some of the injury problems he's had.
Hold on Toronto for a second, because I do have a question about them for this segment here. I'm also curious about the Calgary Flames. I know from training camp that they've wanted to get a top 9 or a top 6 forward. They tried with Sonny Milano. It did not work for them. Cody Eakin was brought in, maybe of a little lesser quality for what they would have wanted, but that did not work. Elliot Friedman was saying that they're still looking for a forward as of last weekend on his own show. Still seems as if Calgary is still looking, considering what's going on with them this season.
Well, yeah. And look, I would suspect that we're going to see that trade somewhere between now and March 3rd. The question is when, right? And that's hardly a bold prediction, but when you have a need that's that clearly identified, obviously the front office and scouting staff goes around the league and identifies all the potential targets. And, Brad True makes his calls and sees if there's any fits anywhere. And, this can be a long process. But, it seems as though that is where Calgary is going to do its shopping. They, like basically the whole league, have only so much cap space to deal with. It's easier to make deals. Well, at least if you're out of LTI, as it gets closer to the deadline, because you accrue cap space as the season goes along. And so I think that there's a number of factors that play into that, but Calgary still feels it's one short, and let's see where it goes there. The funny thing about the Leafs, and because you said hold on Toronto, is the news in the last few days, of course, is that Jake Muzzin is very unlikely to return this year, dealing with a spinal injury. And we certainly wish him well on a personal level. The Leafs now have his cap space, in play. But I think there's going to be a debate when all is said and done. Do they use it on a forward themselves, or is it a straight defenseman? I mean, right now you'd say the odds probably are that they're a defenseman short of what they want to be, but they're a little bit like Ottawa in the sense now they have more minutes to give to Rasmus Sandin and Timothy Liljegren. They're using Jordy Ben as a depth option. I mean, maybe they find some grouping of players even without Muzzin that they like back there, and then they commit that cap space to bring in another forward, because in recent years they haven't had the ability to bring in, if you have a 5.625, which is the cap hit for Muzzin at the deadline in LTI, and you haven't used it, I mean, you could bring in a $10 or $11 million player with half retention, for example. Do you know anyone that fits that mold? I can't think of any right now. There might be a couple. I think guys in Chicago at least worth thinking about.
Yeah, Chicago kind of gets into my mind. I don't know why. I think of Chicago and deep dish pizza.
Right. But I think this is how I would encourage you to look at the Leafs situation, because a lot of my colleagues I've noticed, they announced this Muzzin news and everyone's like, all right, who are they trading for on D? It's like, I actually think, and the team started winning again too, right? Even without Muzzin, even without TJ Brody, who's injured right now. I think they have the luxury of waiting to see how their team comes together, and then figuring out where they might have the best need, as it just gives them flexibility they don't usually have. And so I don't think you can rule out that they're in the market for a forward too. So I think the Leafs could go either way. Obviously, there could be a combination of players too. It doesn't mean you have to go spend it all on one player. Maybe you're bringing multiple players, but the deadline, I think we're going to have a kind of a crazy year for trades. It just, because nothing is happening now, which you would think is a bad thing, but I think it creates more pressure in the system. Like I think ultimately it's going to lead to more of a release, I guess, as we get into the new year. Because that was the one sense I got from talking to a number of the GMs after the meeting here in Toronto this week, is just a lot of them are having trouble getting anywhere with anything on trades right now. And we have some teams that are unexpectedly good, right? Some of the teams we might have thought could be sellers have had a strong start. You look at Seattle, all kinds. I mean, even Arizona, right? I'm not saying that they're going to be buyers, but they've had a better than expected start. Chicago's had a better than expected start. And so it's a long way of getting to the point that I think that this is going to be pretty interesting few months on the trade market once it gets heated up. It's not fully boiled yet. It's just starting to take shape with a meeting like this week's.
Friday, March 3rd. I hope you don't have too many plans for that day, because if it is as crazy as you say, I think we could be in for a really fun one. We'll find a way to make that work.
My only plan is don't call me March 4th or don't expect. Maybe we'll do a pod March 4th, but other than that, I'm not doing any work that day, because the
very fair.
Because the weeks leading up is like, it's relentless. It's fun. It's great. Don't get me wrong. It's not a complaint, but there's nothing quite like the days after the trade deadline when you can kind of kick back a little bit.
So I can imagine, actually the day before trade deadline day, the Leafs are in Calgary. I guess that means I can't count on you being in Calgary that trip. I'm
telling you, if it was any other time of the season, I would have made a way to be there. But it's literally the Leafs are on their Western Canada road trip during the deadline. I got to be in Toronto in studio with TSN and all that. So it doesn't mean I won't get to Calgary some other time this season. I just have to find a creative way. Other than that, or maybe the day after the trade deadline, we just meet at the Elbow Room and we'll call it even.
We just fly to Florida. So
We'll do
we
the
still have
pod from the elbow room.
Oh my God. Elbow room, if you happen to be listening, I mean, we got to find a way to get them to listen to this. I guess when I eventually go there, I'll slip this into these guys, be like, hey, you want to work out something? That'd be a great live show opportunity.
It would be. I don't know if we have many fans in South Florida, but it would be fun for us to just set up, relax, get a little sun, and hash over the trade deadline.
Or maybe all-star game weekend idea, if we could find a way to get the big boss man, Adam Wild, to get me there, because I don't know if the Athletic will let me there. Anyway, that is just workshopping those ideas. Two quick things before we get to stick taps and cross checks. Interesting, two other topics here that actually have nothing to do with trade chatter. We all saw what happened, unfortunately, to Evander Kane a couple of days ago with him getting his wrist cut in a game. I'm wondering if in those meetings or if anywhere around the league, there's been some discussions about how to prevent any of those situations from happening again.
Yeah, there's I think 4 approved sort of sleeves, protective sleeves are called. So there's, different ones. I'm sure certain players like the feel of one versus another that are currently an option for NHL players. Some players do wear them. There's also ones that protect the Achilles. So back, because we've seen, Erik Karlsson way back in the day, David Boland, a few players have had their Achilles accidentally sliced by an opponent's skate. What the discussion though is, one GM did ask, at least my understanding of it is, can we mandate this for players? And they actually can't. The NHL Players Association has a complete say in any of those types of changes to the rules or the rule book. But maybe it's something down the road with more discussion, more studying you might see, because these are obviously very significant and serious injuries that can happen. You hate to say it, in any single game. There wasn't just the Evander Kane incident in Tampa last week. There was actually an international tournament in Finland last week called the Karjala Cup, and a player there had his wrist cut by a skate. So, I mean, it's a little more common maybe than we want to think about, because it's not a great topic and it could have some really serious repercussions. If what happened to Evander Kane happened in a beer league game and there isn't the medical personnel around, I mean, the outcome might be much worse. So, there's nothing yet happening, but I could see a world down the road where it gets mandated and grandfathered in the way visors were about 10 years ago, right? There was a rule brought in, I think it was around 2013, and said anyone new in the league from now on has to wear a visor. If you were in the league before now, you have the choice. I could see that kind of adoption cycle happen at some point. And, it only makes sense that you'd want to protect players as much as you can. I mean, I don't think there's any debate about that.
Absolutely. And the last thing, this obviously with the Mitchell Miller news that came about in the last few episodes that we did GMs come together and discuss that at their meetings, or has there been any other discussion about that?
Yeah, I was told there was a discussion on Tuesday about that Gary Bettman addressed it, went through some of the issues, and, as it was relayed to me, not from Gary Bettman, by someone in the room, basically gave the advice, I guess, that the league would like to have more discussion before you sign players, if you think there's going to be issues like this or backlash like this or something to discuss. And also that he made what, is the point I think we've all asked, like, is it really worth it? Like, if you have to have these discussions, I think he urged the GMs to think twice about these sort of decisions. So I think that the league, it sounds like, wanted to clear the air or maybe clear up any misconceptions around that. There's nothing pertaining to discipline or anything like that for the Bruins, but just they did go over that situation from what I was told. And I think the commissioner politely reminded everyone to think twice before they try to do something like this.
Okay. All right. A lot we just delved into over this last little while. It's now time for stick taps, but we've decided to slightly change around the segment for good here. So not only will this be called stick taps, we're calling it stick taps and cross checks. And this comes after last Thursday when CJ decided to turn his stick tap into what did you call it? A hit from behind?
I don't know what I referred to it as, but I went after Elon Musk and I took a major for cross checking. I had a hearing with the Department of Player Safety. I'm still waiting to find out what my suspension looks like.
feel like it would be pretty redundant for them to do that, considering we have no idea what the future of Twitter is going to be. I'm going to use a stick tap this week and just say thank you to everyone who has been sending me a lot of love and praise for the article I wrote this week for The Athletic, an oral history detailing the Matthew Tkachuk, Jonathan Huberdeau trade. It took me a lot of work to put together, almost like a month and a half, almost 2 months. And I'm really happy that people are enjoying it. I'm happy that people are subscribing to The Athletic through that article. So I just want to take the time just to say thank you and stick taps to everybody. Thank you.
Great article, bud. I'm going to give a stick tap today. I don't think I'm going to use the cross check a lot. Like I want to promote.
It's an option. It's there.
I want to see happiness in the world, man. I want to focus on all the good things, and there's so many good things around us. And so the cross check will be lightly used, I would predict, by me. But so I'll give a stick tap today to Trevor Moore, a player for the Los Angeles Kings. I got to know a little bit during his time in Toronto, scored his first career hat trick on Wednesday night in Edmonton. Great guy, the sort of role player that you wouldn't expect to score too many hat tricks. It was cool to see how happy he was. And it's just neat. He's a native of Thousand Oaks, California, and gets to play for the LA Kings and live his dream. And I was happy to see Trevor have some success in that game last night.
A peaceful, pleasant end to our Thursday edition of the Chris Johnston Show. CJ, thank you as always. Thank you for everyone watching at home or listening, however you listen to this podcast. Thank you for listening to our podcast. Subscribe to the podcast however you listen to podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, whatever, doesn't matter. Subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'll be back on Monday with a new episode. Please get your questions in, whether you're on our Discord or whether you are just someone on Twitter. Hey, maybe Twitter will still be a thing on Monday in time for Ask CJ. For CJ, I'm Julian saying so long and peace.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction, Canada's sportsbook.
Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.